Enterprise podcast, where we delve into all things enterprise and also in their pure abstract. I'm joined today by EJ, as the industry formally calls him, who's been a transformations and a digital transformation leader with many stalwart enterprises. Most recently, leading the digital transformation for BNY and also similar important themes, I'd say, in today's contemporary times with PayPal as well. So, welcome to the Enterprise podcast, EJ. And for our viewers, why don't you tell us who you are and what do you?
Well, first, Suresh, I am humbled and honored to be part of the podcast and deliver a message to the audience about technology, the use of technology, and the value that we can bring to enterprises. My early journey started in the Air Force, where I had a great opportunity to engage warfighters in operational test and evaluation, and also other work overseas, specifically in Korea, to develop IT resiliency plans to protect our national interests. I further had a journey, especially in the last 15 years, working in a number of enterprises, specifically in banking and payments. Some of the engagements were client facing, such as instituting mass transit fare collection systems, migrated over into large enterprise companies such as eBay and PayPal and Visa, KeyBank and BNY most recently. Now my journey has really taken me into fractional leadership and fractional leadership in ERP, modernization, cybersecurity, and endpoint protection within that particular domain, and continued innovation and money movement relative to payments.
Wow, I mean that's some backdrop, U.S. Air Force and resiliency. And one word that I probably want to latch on, EJ, is the modernization. We like I said in the Enterprise podcast, we talk about things in their pure abstract, meaning that these themes could be very important, they could be very pertinent, but they're not talked about as much. Or maybe the fancy stuff takes over. We are living in a times of great progress. Every day you hear something new on technology. Being in this landscape, the modernization agenda for the enterprise is equally becoming complex. So, I mean, who better than you would probably take us through some of the forces that are play, and which is the topic of our podcast today. What does the enterprise digital modernization of today look like, and what are the forces in play? So, can you speak to us a bit about the landscape and the forces that impact these modernization initiatives?
Absolutely. I'm going to frame it this way regarding modernization. What we're really talking about organizationally is a mindset change. And in my most recent experience at BNY, have 50,000 employees. The greatest change was the mindset change. Long-term employees doing great work, shifting to an agile culture, shifting to a way of working. The value wasn't in the new system, meaning an IT platform coming on board. The value really came from the way we create value from problems that needed to be solved. So, number one, framing or reframing modernization from a mindset shift and the value that we can bring to the organization as quickly as possible. Relative to forces, these are anecdotes that I've experienced over 20 plus years relative to what are the forces that are initiating, driving, causing pain, etc. The first one, strategy and execution gap. We all have sat in rooms where there's a wonderful PowerPoint, where there's a wonderful vision slide on that direction, how fast, I call it the vector. It's the speed and direction of the target that we need to achieve. And the challenge for leaders, be it at the C level, your functional leaders just below, and the folks that are working diligently to achieve those goals and objectives, is how do we actually do that in overcoming that fear? So
Mm.
we're going to expand on that whole space regarding strategy and execution. The next one is customer centricity. You hear about a lot of concepts like design thinking, etc. But okay, what does that really mean? Oftentimes, in my experience, it's really sitting down face to face, working with the client, working with that particular customer, and defining their problem statement. Even more importantly, having them show me their customer experience, be it going on the manufacturing floor where they're working with an ERP system that doesn't receive product and doesn't give them the end result from an order to cash standpoint that's impacting the CFO, or sitting down in a cybersecurity NOC, a network operating center, trying to understand the inputs that are coming in from discovery tools that are preventing bad actors from infiltrating their corporate network, and what type of dashboards and analytics. But more important, you're getting all this data. How in the world do I filter through it to actually make sound decisions?
Hmm.
Next one is being able to innovate without chaos. Oftentimes there's a sense of urgency and oftentimes anxiousness, and the organization is not prepared for it because they haven't exercised that muscle. Oftentimes we'll bring leaders in, they have a charter, they have sponsorship, they have a certain level of influence, but the cadre that they're working with has been there 5, 10, 15 years and doing the good work for the organization. And oftentimes there is, I'll call it the friction of being able to take on the enthusiasm for change and the execution on how to go about the change. And oftentimes, what we have to do is not just communicate what I'll call the three things: one, how to perform discovery; two, how to perform design; and three, how to perform delivery. There's a lot of techniques out there: extreme
Hmm.
programming, all sorts of versions of agile,
Hmm.
waterfall, and
Hmm.
then hybrid models in between. The bottom
Hmm.
line is those three items for discovery, design, and delivery, that's a muscle, if you will, for the organization as a whole to begin to exercise that mitigates that anxiousness that oftentimes occurs. And then lastly, the rise of folks like myself in fractional leadership. What I have seen in the marketplace is a compressing of roles and titles. So, for example, you go into, I'll call it a logo company, if you will, a large enterprise company, and oftentimes now you're seeing a compression between at the C level, beginning there. You're seeing C level roles such as a chief product officer and chief technology officer brought together. You're seeing roles like chief operating officer and CFO brought together. And the reason why is, let's call it what it is. Every enterprise wants some level of efficiency, and it's not just in headcount. The efficiency oftentimes comes in decision making. So when you bring
Hmm.
in a fractional leader, what you're seeking is to deliver a high level of value. We'll call it the 80%, and deliver that value as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm seeing in the change in the organization, and those are the four forces that I'm experiencing, seen it evolve over the 20 plus years to where we are today.
Wow. I mean, that was it was a big question. I was a little nervous myself, in so much which is going on, and to be asking somebody in today's time and age as to, okay, what are the forces of digital modernization in itself is a very, I would say, loaded question. But I like how you beautifully structured that, Elia. And what also, it got me thinking about, I think you had me when you said mindset, and it's about the mindset and not that fancy platform or a new service delivery partner. I'll give you I just remembered this story when you're saying this. I used to be working with Siemens in my past life, and I used to be with their diagnostic division. Apparently, we used to sell these biochemistry analyzers and immunoassay analyzers, and it's a very highly technology driven kind of a sale where you're talking to the throughputs of the machines and the various parameters, that human body parameters, and those parameters are like, if I remember it correctly, the quantum of those analytes presence in your body is like 10 raised to the power minus 9, like it's like 10 picogram per ml, so like 10 raised to the power whatever, 12 minus 12 or minus 9 per ml. So that is the quantum of analyte. So it is really, really critical for those customers. One, I mean, it's a human life at stake. Second is that those consumables are really important. So you could have the reagent, but if you don't have the reaction vessel, which we used to call the cuvette, you can't perform that test, right? Now, why did your mindset take me part of your discourse take me back to Siemens is because I was under a lot of pressure. I've been in sales ever since, and then I was under a lot of pressure because at a very big government hospital, one of the state heads had to be tested for something. This was in India, and it was a Siemens analyzer that was installed there, and they had runoff of cuvettes, which is the reaction vessel. And I was like, I knew that it was back ordered. That particular make of a cuvette was back ordered, and I was like grappling for like table to table in my Siemens office, talking to the supply chain guys. And there's this one guy we fondly used to call him. We still call him Pawar Sahib. Pawar was his surname, and Sahib means boss in the Indian colloquial language. So he was like the Pawar Sahib. So he asked me, like, why are you so troubled? What's happened? Like, what's bothering you? And I said that now an SAP code for a QA is I'd say 6 to 8 digit code, right? And I told him that this is my problem. And what he said was that, oh, and this is he said in Hindi, I'm just trying to convert this. He said 304862. I know it's not available. Why did you go with 4856? He actually remembered an alternate qubit material code that I could use. And that's what I called mindset. The ERP could not save me on a state head appointment, which is kind of going to go haywire if we don't have the reaction vessel there. So I deeply resonate with that. And I see it time and again how these programs have failed or succeeded, but a lot of it is mindset. So you had me when you mentioned mindset.
I appreciate that. Right now, in the work that I'm doing, what I am seeking is to know the heart of the customer. So, for example, I'll take a startup or a company that is either VC or PE backed. And oftentimes, in those coming deals, the impact to the long term employee that is actually doing the work from day to day is so very important. Is being able to sit down and get their trust and to begin to viscerally feel what's the friction, what's the problem, what's the challenges that they're experiencing. You take that back in whatever format, a survey, a questionnaire, usually ends up into some type of PowerPoint, some type of Pareto that says, hey, this is the number of incidents. And then we put some type of value on it. We communicate to the C-level leaders that says, from a prioritization matrix, we recommend you go after this issue. But that person on the floor is still experiencing what they experience day in and day out. And the only
Yeah.
thing they care about is, can you fix my problem? And more importantly, after you do all of that stakeholder relationship communicate, which by the way is important. They're the ones that are paying the bill, so to speak, for me to be there or my team to be there and to deliver the value. Is now, once we get to agreement, how fast can we move? So that's the underlying, when I talked about those other forces, the need for speed is always paramount. It never goes away. It doesn't go away for a startup. It doesn't go
Yeah.
away for a VC or PE back type startup. It doesn't go away for enterprises. But if people don't understand or don't know that you care about them, the likelihood of success begins to go down.
Yeah.
And
Of
that is the
course.
greatest lesson learned, and that I have to keep at the forefront of my mind when I go into these engagements. People
Yeah.
matter and have an empathetic heart.
And that's so beautifully said, EJ, because that was a segue to how is with so much of a change, and I really want to kind of hit the blank slate also at times, that whether or not there is a need to change at scale and speed. I mean, what are those compulsions? We spoke about mindset. We spoke about the gap between strategy and execution, and you also spoke to the fact that whatever analytics might come to an enterprise leadership, the stakeholder with that problem statement apparently stays longer with that problem. And I would say that is true for external customers as well as internal employees,
Yes.
because these processes, I mean, if they are complicated or complex or not digitally, I would say, enabled sufficiently, then there would be a roadblock both for the internal employees as well as the external employees. So in all of this going on, like we also softly concluded that maybe it's also a stakeholder representation kind of an issue. Would you say that in terms of a customer and the internal employee?
My role in that is to bridge the gap.
Mhm.
So I'll give a really large process. I'll call this order to cash. And let's speak about a digital journey. So be it brick and mortar, be it web or mobile, you have this omni-channel experience and the external customers is seeking a product or service.
Mhm.
Depending on the omni-channel experience, the customer just wants consistency. And in that consistent experience, it's an enabler to begin the order to cash process.
Mm.
So that's I'll call it the paying customer experience, ensuring, and oftentimes that takes engagement with that external customer. And that's why we see after whatever omni channel experience that we have, folks are asking for, can we get your customer feedback? If I traveled on Southwest Airlines, there's some email that comes back, customer feedback. If I'm on IVR, which is an older technology, telephony, people still have that. They always ask customer feedback. This is incredibly important. Understand that omni channel experience, and no matter what the experience is, make it consistent.
Mm.
Internally now is the delivery aspect of that order to cash.
Mhm.
And this is where you get into, I'll call it the disparate experiences of legacy technology,
Mhm.
legacy processes, and legacy thinking.
Mm.
That's the challenge. The customer's thinking is the customer's thinking. We're not going to change that. They
Mm.
just want consistency. That's the most important thing. But internally, within the four walls of an organization, those legacy ways of doing business, the legacy ways of engaging both legacy and modern experiences, I'm really talking about systems, is where the change needs to occur. And then
Mm.
finally, after you go through that, what I'll call the order flow, which is a sub process, it's the consuming of the request, profile information of a customer, be it a B2B, B2C experience, the flow that now says to the CFO that says, you know what? It took $100 to acquire that particular customer. It took another 100.
Mm.
And when I talk about customer acquisition, they may have come through the flow based on, let's say, some type of offering or discount.
Mm.
It took another $150 to get that product or service through our pipeline. We'll just call that throughput. And from a cost of goods standpoint, you look at that overall, that order flow to at the end, our actual revenue. And you
Mm.
start doing the math, and you start looking at this is what our EBITDA was, and more importantly, at that gross margin level, was it worth it? Was it
Mm.
worth it? So that's kind of the mindset I have when I do an engagement
Nice.
is bridging the gap between the paying customer, bridging the gap in that whole order flow
Mm.
process with the teams, and I say teams of people that
Mhm.
are performing the work from supply chain to manufacturing
Mhm.
or in other enterprises where you don't have, I'll call them the asset light type of experiences
Mm.
to the end state where, hmm, what does our cash flow look like? Because it's
Right.
really about cash. And then are we going to continue to invest in those experiences? And if we do invest in those experiences, what is the lift going to be? A lift on
Mm.
the revenue side
Mm.
or optimization of costs from a cost of goods sold standpoint. So
Yep.
that's the way I think about that.
Of course. I think that makes a lot of sense because it's not just the internal forces. I mean, there are forces with which the prospect or the customer for that enterprise is also grappling with. So all of them kind of combine together to and then I think that the mandate on the enterprise is also to kind of boil everything down to the cash, and that's where it becomes a little difficult. But I
Yeah,
think I'm loving this conversation till now, Eli. How about you?
I'm enjoying it greatly.
Awesome, awesome. So I want to speak to also the risk or inhibitors, when an enterprise is on a modernization journey. And you said all the right things in terms of an enterprise's mandate to be generating cash, the mandate of CSAT or NPS, or and then also the cost of customer acquisition and all of that. So there are so many forces to balance for an enterprise already. And in that, if an enterprise is also taking a digital modernization initiative, what to your mind could be some of the risks to that initiative?
Certainly. One of the primary challenges is the readiness of the organization to change.
Mm,
I'll come back to change management time and again. It's not just casting the vision. Do people actually believe in it? That is so critical. Do people actually believe in it? That onboarding process of belief takes continuous communication, be it in a blog post, be it communicated externally to your investors, be it through town hall sessions with the enterprise as a whole. And
mm,
the organization needs to see the communication come from the top and to see that the leadership has the resolve.
mm,
May be long-term employees in certain key
mm.
roles that
Yeah.
says, I have seen this before. I'll just wait and see if they follow through. And
Mm,
oftentimes that affects the speed of delivery. So getting the organization ready, continuous communication, omni-channel communication, demonstrating leadership resolve to
mm,
complete what's been communicated. The next one is what I'll call tooling. Do we have the right people, talent in place? And have we equipped them with the right tools to be able to execute efficiently?
mm,
And that's an assessment that the organization needs to take on. It's one thing to communicate, hey, this is where we're headed, but
mhm,
do we have the right talent and have we equipped them appropriately? It
mm,
becomes chaos when you get a mandate from leadership and folks sit down and the vision is cast from strategy to tactical execution says, how are we actually going to do this? I've
mm,
never done this before. I don't know how to do this, etc. That will take a large enterprise oftentimes months to consider. Whereas in a
mm,
smaller organization, you can look around the room. And that's
mm,
the advantage of a small or medium sized organization being able to pivot and move to take on big problems because they'll go and find the talent at a much
yeah.
faster cycle time and get the right talent in the right place. And this is why, too, from a forces standpoint, I'm bringing in leaders like yourself and others that have had a wide variety of experience. I'll call that the depth and breadth to take on the ambiguity that requires a format, a
Mm,
structure, if you will, to give the organization what I'll call the path forward. And that's
mm.
what large organizations oftentimes struggle with. Smaller organizations, medium sized organizations can get there faster.
Wow. Yeah. And I think what you said, in my journey as a professional, I've seen both sides of the story, modernization initiatives succeeding or failing for that matter. I mean, for technology products or technology solutions, at times the pricing and the sizing and the estimations are a very complex thing to do. You understand that. So back in the day in Siemens also, so an assay menu of an analyzer is more than at times 1,000 tests for some of the analyzers. Now when you are, and the organizations who are in this space, they subsidize the capex for the customer because they have a little higher margin on the reagents or the consumable standpoint, and that's a recurring revenue that they get. So but to be able to kind of converge it into a pricing case, it takes a lot of manual used to take a lot of manual efforts. And then there was this DXCon, like a configurator tool kind of stuff, where the sales guys had to be trained on. I think, to your point, like taking everybody along and equipping them. And I think the third portion is also having a very clear value statement as to what is there in it for them. So for the sales guys, I think those as it is, sales guys are not really very good friends with finance and legal. So so their to and fro, their iterations, that really reduced, and we saw huge adoption of that new configurator tool, and then it was like the sales guy did not have to depend on the go to market or the time to market generation of proposals, and then the sales cycle got a lot faster. I 100% resonate with each word you said, Elia. And that also brings me to, like we said, like where in terms of taking care of the interests of stakeholders. So I mean, that's my next direction I want to kind of talk to you about. Again, a very broad based question, but then at the level of the enterprise and at the enterprise modernization or a digital enterprise modernization landscape, who would be the stakeholders, like the critical ones, where you miss one and then probably you're not either looking at a full picture of the modernization attempt, or you are heading towards some disaster? What would you say to that?
I think it's important to provide context of the enterprise that you're engaging with. So I'll speak on a venture backed company or PE backed firm. And contextually, when I engage the senior leaders, is what's their exit strategy? They are on a timeline of cash burn.
Hmm.
They have invested or see value in the investment, either a differentiated service or a differentiated product that's can be a 10 plus multiple.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a belief that it can be achieved in, let's say, 5, 6 years, or even faster if we do these things. So these things oftentimes are get the right leadership in place, invest in the right technology, but not too much,
Hmm.
and also go through a rationalization process on the physical assets, be it people or property that they have. Contextually, I want to understand that because
Hmm.
then it informs me about the method or
Hmm.
methods that I'm going to employ for
Hmm.
change management that we just spoke about.
Yep.
So, for example, oftentimes before a ERP is ever implemented, understanding what the business processes are wildly important. And
Hmm.
there's techniques such as value stream mapping and other
Mm-hmm.
types of workshops to go through that level of due diligence. Contextually, I may not have the time,
Hmm.
nor does a smaller enterprise have the people or investment dollars to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to come in as quickly as possible now to perform an assessment. So that requires a different level of methodology. I call it like like guerrilla warfare.
Hmm.
It's using what I call non-conventional techniques
Hmm.
for an environment that has a high level of urgency. So if you
Hmm.
contextually, you may have the right knowledge, but if you employ the wrong technique, I'll call it the conventional techniques,
Hmm.
there can be a high level of customer friction and dissatisfaction that will likely make this a very short term engagement. Because the only thing that the customer wants at the end of the day is for you to deliver on what was agreed to in that commercial agreement.
Yeah, 100% agree to that. You also, in our past conversation, CJ, you also spoke to us, like we had this discussion about, what the great modernization initiative at KeyBank with so many diverse stakeholders, the regulators and partners and all of that. Why don't you tell us something about that?
Yeah, so in that particular journey was absolutely fascinating. I was brought on board several months after KeyBank had acquired a startup and they wanted to scale in embedded payments. And the work that I was brought on to perform was an area they called multi-product opening, which technically in the parlance of banking is really we had to create a banking as a service platform.
Hmm.
So it wasn't just this account opening solution. A service platform allows you the ability to scale, being able to communicate. It says the vision that you actually are communicating needs to be larger. Was a differentiation for me communicating to the stakeholders. Oftentimes, let's call it what it is. If you don't inform a stakeholder that he or she has a vision that's much larger, and you need to be able to communicate a larger vision and what that target and timeline looks like. So, my approach with that too was let's communicate an iterative strategy, which was much different than their approach. Instead of going with a big bang approach, And this included immediate proof of concept, getting that in front of the regional retail leaders. Internally, for me, my challenge was I inherited a team that had been
Hmm.
working together on the product and engineering side, getting it reorganized so that there was a clear level or delineation of responsibilities, back end focus versus front end focus, how many resources, getting in the design team engaged. And then I always communicated to the team too. It's wonderful to deliver a particular product or service. The proof of the effectiveness of it is the long term logistics. How do you
Mm.
support the overall product lifecycle
Yeah.
and ramping up the technical expertise and the documentation associated with that? So again,
Hmm.
as to summarize this, communicate or understand what the vision is that's being communicated, adjustments with the leadership and get agreement. Use the proper technique in the environment that you want. This was a high level sense of urgency. There was not a lot of belief. It was an organization that oftentimes kicked off initiatives, but the IT delivery, if you will, was not satisfying to business leaders. So often what we did too, many methods used in Agile, we made sure that we were doing product demos as quickly as possible, generally after every 2 week sprint cycle.
Mm.
The team actually led that. My value add was dividing and conquering the strategy itself. This cannot be big bang. It has to be iterative. And more importantly, unpacking the level of complexity. They want
Mm.
to go with deposits right away. Well,
Mm.
deposits are much more complicated. 20 or more APIs, either existing or that needed to be built, versus loan products that use the same subset of APIs. So we flip that on its head and we're able to deliver sooner, faster on deposits by launching the loan products within 9 months of that I start. And then 3, 4 months after the delivery of the loan products in the marketplace, because we had become familiar with the experiences that the customer was having, we were able to launch those deposit products 3, 4 months later. And it took a lot of time out, customer satisfaction went up, etc. And
Mm.
sometimes those are oftentimes hard talks with business leaders. You're not delivering what I wanted in the order in which I wanted. And being able to communicate both from a business side and a technology side, the value of being able to deliver or to reorder the prioritization and what you're going to experience and why. That's always like the why question. Well, why are you doing it this way or versus this way is wildly important. And oftentimes, hard conversations with leaders was you brought me in not as an order taker. I'm not here as an order taker. I'm
Mm.
here to be as a change agent for you. And
Mhm.
these experiences with the data will prove this out for you. And that,
Mm.
it takes a lot of relationship building to do that. You
Mm.
can't call it coming in hot, carpet bombing somebody else's idea that was propagated before. And that can oftentimes, I've had those hard friction filled type of conversations and stood fast with it because of conviction. And when we
Mm.
have conviction with data, that's generally a winning formula.
Yeah, I like that. It is so timely when you say when you talk about the friction. So that's a good segue, EJ, to my next question, which is on the contrasts of enterprise modernization. You spoke about friction and how to also alleviate that friction, but would you have any thoughts about the contrasts that exist in today's enterprise modernization story?
In today's enterprise modernization story, I'm hearing from customers the need for AI, all things AI, and not truly understanding uh, the value that artificial intelligence can bring. We've had some version of artificial intelligence for some time. You go back to machine language. And just because you hear about a AI application, is it appropriate in the environment for which you operate in? I kind of go back to my Air Force days in operational test and evaluation. There was two overarching themes. One was suitability, one was effectiveness. So the statement I just spoke on was about suitability. The suitability oftentimes came into what we called human factors in engineering, or the person interfacing with the system itself. So, number one, not just business process. Oftentimes we'll come in and speak about business process. It's about deliberately changing the behavior that the employees experience. So let's kind of talk about it from a retail standpoint. Over time, in the last, I'll call it from the mid 90s onward, we're seeing more and more and more self-service at checkout,
Mm.
to the point where there is technology, where there is no interaction whatsoever with a point of sale system. You pick your items up, you put them in a cart, you go down a particular lane, you go out the door, it's checked out. We've seen that. We've experienced that. Remember the Amazon stores? You could
Yeah.
do that in the Amazon stores. Think about what changed there. Think about the human capital that was no longer in the retail space. Think about, too, though, if I'm as a customer, I'm not able to get the product, or I'm not familiar with that retail layout, where do I go for help to
Mhm.
select the product that I really want? So that's kind of a retail space. I'll go into a manufacturing space. Oftentimes, the folks that are doing the work are employees that were on the assembly line or in the distribution operation, were tied to a specific area just because of the workstation. I'll use that generically, depending on what your time has been in tech or interacting with tech in manufacturing. They were stationary and they couldn't move. Now we've got all types of form factors where you're mobile.
Yep.
Okay, step back now even further. Now in tech, we would perform some type of evaluation, and I have yet to see one that was truly scientific on how long it would take for a developer to generate code.
Mm.
It's Python, JSON, whatever code. How long would it take?
Mm.
And what drove that?
Mm.
Oftentimes, the value play was, how many hours? Okay, we can source this type of expertise elsewhere. So we got into
Mm.
this offshoring model. We went
Mm.
into a follow the sun strategy, which is still out there, but we forgot what it took to link the developer, the product communicator, product leader, and the customer together in the value in a geographic location.
Mm.
These are the things that are still incredibly important and that AI cannot solve for us. These are the
Yeah.
human factors. These are truly the human factors pieces. So just because you want greater efficiency and whatnot, okay, you're going to get your efficiency. But more importantly, maybe, are you going to get the value?
Mm.
Are you going to get the innovation? And oftentimes that's much more abstract than it is concrete.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's not binary that can be coded,
No,
right?
no.
I love it. I love the way you express that, Eli. And I feel similarly about a lot of these, very aggressive maneuvers in terms of digitizing stuff, as if there is a compulsion at times. And when you say that, in terms of the human factor, you also mentioned that it's a modernization is a mindset and it's not a milestone. So when we have these two things together, the human factor and the modernization being, a mindset and not a milestone, what would you say about the post-delivery experience for enterprises? Is it smooth? Can it be any better? Are there some things that we should take care of? What are your thoughts?
You oftentimes here in the product world is to have the end in mind when you're beginning the whole conceptualization. So having the end in mind through what I call iterative customer journeys is wildly important.
Hmm.
That customer journey doesn't end when you deliver that particular feature or features.
Yeah.
It continues. It's having that continuous improvement mentality. So one of my previous lives was in Lean Six Sigma. And the overarching theme is you're never perfect. You're
Hmm.
never perfect. There's always an ingenious way to do something better that we haven't thought of before. And oftentimes that is gleaned through experience. That is
Hmm.
gleaned through hands-on experience.
Yeah.
So when I start to think about articulating product support documents and those sorts of things, I don't go into formatting. I don't go into, hey, this has to be in the Confluence page. This has to be up on the SharePoint. That's just the mechanics, if you
Mm,
will. I go into an experience. Think of it this way, and I'll take aim at identity and access management because there's a lot of enterprise, large logo companies in this space. And identity and access management is wildly important. We hear the horror stories of fraud, data leaks, etc., etc. And being able to essentially know that the person or service or company that you're interacting with is legitimate is wildly important.
mhm,
So the what if becomes you've deployed the feature. For whatever reason, the feature either has a bug, it breaks, the knowledge articles that I have don't work, the SDKs are challenging to read. Maybe the customer doesn't even want to read them. The videos aren't as tight knit. Folks don't want all these sorts of things come into various aspects of product support. And
mm,
again, becomes an omni-channel experience. So now you've got to capture how a customer thinks and learns.
mm,
If you come in with the mindset that they're all text based or they're all visual based, what we're trying to ascertain in supporting a feature such as identity access management, and after we deploy a feature, is how will the customer, oftentimes from a self serve standpoint, consume and help themselves?
mhm,
The enterprise is challenged with that because generally they know that the human interface with the customer
mm,
is most preferred, but it also has the highest cost. And oftentimes we cannot ascertain or achieve the scale and efficiencies, which takes you into your space as far as customer service centers. You work with these challenges all day, every day on this omni-channel experience and where can we optimize and achieve the customer satisfaction scores that we want to deliver not only for our end customer but the larger customer that's paying us for these services.
yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, yes, we get that a lot in terms of, the most preferred version still is the human voice. I would say that. And while I think there is a lot of feedback to the larger enterprises in terms of demographic shifts that are happening, both in terms of their product or service that they're taking to the market. Say insurance for an example, or wealth and asset management for an example, the average age of a person who's investing in these different asset classes, and that awareness of wealth is increasing by the day, and so is the demography shifting towards a more younger population getting to experience these products and interact with these brands. I agree with you. I mean, we get this a lot, and we cannot put all of that in one demography. And also the fact that from a product standpoint, I mean, maybe the last agile or waterfall leap is kind of done, but that does not really stop the continuum of the customer continuing to interact with the brand. That's beautiful. So no, it's so much. I was really nervous. I'll be very candid with you. I was kind of nervous getting into the conversation with EJ, considering it's a very broad topic, digital modernization of the enterprise, so many industry verticals. But then we spoke a lot about its genesis, its stakeholders, what does it look like, what could be the risks and inhibitors. And then I think the mindset thing got me real hard on in terms of a perspective, and like bringing it all together. And I really, when we spoke about this podcast, I also mentioned to you that I'm a great fan of that veteran wisdom that comes along, and I have huge respect for it. Leaders like you and many of your peers, and even the leaders before you, who've really set this enterprise stage globally as to what the state of the enterprise is today. And to that effect, I want to ask you this while we close out. As EJ, what is your offering? To what do you bring on board today as a veteran wisdom, or as a part of this ecosystem which is so radically evolving? People like young and upcoming professionals like me would really want to latch on to that wisdom and just to consume the movement of the enterprise and the markets and the customer in a manner so that we can at least keep pace with the great leaders that the enterprise community has had.
Again, I'm really humbled by the question. These will be my anecdotes, and then people can perform hypothesis tests over time. What I have learned is flexibility is wildly important. Flexibility in the way I think. Number two, knowledge acquisition all day, every day, and the learning the different methods of knowledge acquisition. So much of our knowledge acquisition today is self service. I was bemoaning there was a time of our great enterprise companies often had their own internal universities. If you
Yeah.
and folks are like, what? Yeah, Ford Motor Company used to have a university. IBM had a university. GE had universities. And they
Siemens
taught
has.
the best curriculums that any undergraduate state school, and you would get certificates and so on and so forth. So many of those things are no longer part of the enterprise. Now we have them online and whatnot, but oftentimes those universities were in person experiences where you were able to build relationships at different levels in the organization. So I bemoan that loss, that human interaction piece, but being able to acquire knowledge and knowledge rapidly.
Mm.
The third thing is leadership continuum. As a former military officer, my first style of leadership that I was exposed to at the Air Force Academy was very much top down.
Mm.
But as you went from level to level to level in leadership, you start to learn either by the hot stove method because you failed, or through learning laboratories, or through great mentoring networks that you're going to have in your toolbox a leadership continuum and understanding the emotional intelligence of yourself, meaning self awareness, and of the people that you're engaging with. So
Mm.
those are the three things that I can leave with. And then one more is as you're going through your journey, use it as a ladder to lift other people up. That's
Wow.
wildly important. I'm not seeking out people to be a replica of me. Is to be able to maybe drop a hint of knowledge. I'll give you
Mm.
some examples for me. Some are funny, some are, just a morsel that was inspiring. So, one that I had from a colonel in the Air Force, he said, EJ, you have to allow people to catch up with you.
Mm.
And that was a soft way
Wow.
of letting him know that you've got the foundation from a knowledge standpoint. You got to bring people along
Yeah.
and to your way of thinking. You just can't come in like an arrow, coming in hot. This is the way. Now, okay,
Yeah.
that may be the way, but take them on the thought journey on how you got there. Take them on the thought journey on why the organization as a whole needs to go there.
Wow.
Fair? Another appreciate one for the folks that are, I'll call it in the wealth creation space, which quite frankly, uh, never really stops. I'm trying to seek out legacy, but I had one leader tell me, you don't get rich looking at your W 2. It says a lot about motivation.
Mm.
And so the richness that I have had in my life is the breadth and depth of experiences, but you want to create and leave a legacy financially for your family or the institutions that you have been a part of, and the motivations behind that. And oftentimes it's through more than one stream of income, or it's going to come through you being more innovative or partnering with folks that are can lift you and you can lift them together uh, to build not just for yourself but for others. And then lastly, this is from uh, my background in sports. I played collegiate football for the Air Force Academy, and I also boxed. And in those particular experiences, I was part of championship teams, and I was influenced by people that were, quite frankly, more mature than me. They had a level of grit and determination that was unusual. We took on teams that were bigger, stronger, faster, but we generally, in my generation, succeeded because we had a common goal.
Mm.
Everyone knew their roles and responsibilities, but we were also selfless. And I think that's so wildly important.
Mm.
Is oftentimes we come into organizations competing with one another to get to the next rung or to the next ladder.
Mm.
I found a certain level of contentment and satisfaction in seeing the greater enterprise achieve.
Mm.
And if I see the selfishness, or if there is or our behaviors that are not part of my value set, I move on. I don't have any time for relationships that don't add value. And if I'm not add value to the relationship, it's
Mhm.
probably time for me to seek out another journey. I like to always say there's opportunity for everyone in this economy. It's a $27 trillion economy. We
Yeah.
all can contribute and be a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. EJ, I mean, I don't really have words because every conversation with you since this time we've started interacting, right from our first meeting in Phoenix, Arizona. I think it's like it's a delicious discourse, which is very wholesome, and so has turned out, the interaction on this podcast, on the Enterprise podcast. So thank you so very much, EJ, for joining us today on the episode for the Enterprise podcast. And I really look forward to staying connected. And any closing thoughts from your side?
I do. First, Sharice, you are an entrepreneur at heart. You care about people. You reached out to me. It was a very much a surprise. And you and I have continued building a professional relationship. It has been very valuable to me because I continue to learn from everyone. I've learned a lot from you. I've been very humbled by the opportunity to pass on some knowledge that can be consumed by others and to build other people up, build organizations up. And I think that's the legacy at this point in time that I can leave in my life.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll see you on the other side, EJ, and looking forward to meet you soon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sharice. It was a wonderful experience.
Likewise.